What's up, Marvel fans? I'm Steven from the Hills Maniacs, and today I'm going to be answering the question in the title of this video: should the Marvel Netflix shows be renewed for new seasons on Disney Plus? Now, the reason I'm doing this video is because it was recently announced that Marvel shows like Daredevil, Jessica Jones, the Defenders, Punisher, and all them from Netflix are being moved to Disney Plus. Disney recently acquired all Marvel properties essentially, so they had to cancel those shows when they were on Netflix, and now they're finally being moved to Disney Plus after I think it's been like 3 years since they were all canceled on Netflix. So today I'm going to be looking at whether or not they should be given like new seasons since they're on Disney Plus now, and how that will kind of tie into the overall MCU, because we know some of these characters have been popping up lately in the MCU properties. Like in the Hawkeye show on Disney Plus, we saw Kingpin, or at least a variant of Kingpin, showing up. Wilson Fisk, he was the main bad guy of that show, essentially. He didn't really show up to the last episode, but it was still there. Like, we haven't seen him in any other MCU property since the Daredevil show on Netflix, which those were ruled that they weren't part of the MCU, like they weren't actually canon, even though they took place in the MCU, like after the Battle of New York and everything, especially that, like that was a major thing. Like, because I think the Daredevil show followed that the events of the Avengers, kind of, without ever mentioning the Avengers. It takes place in that like 2012 New York, after the Battle of New York. You can see newspaper articles and all that stuff referencing that without them ever mentioning the Avengers and things like that. So seeing that kind of was tied into the MCU, but not really, like maybe now they can. And we even saw Matt Murdock appear in Spider-Man No Way Home, and he's still a lawyer and things like that. So I feel that if they were to add new seasons to all these shows, like Daredevil, or like Daredevil especially, because that was like my favorite one. I think everybody agrees that was the best one they had on Netflix. I think it would be interesting to see what he's been up to for the last essentially 10 years within the MCU timeline, because if the Daredevil show took place in 2012, maybe 2013 or whatever, depending on when it actually takes place after the Battle of New York, it kind of makes you wonder, like, what's he been up to all this time? He's obviously still a lawyer if we're seeing him in No Way Home, so it's not like it might not be a variant of Matt Murdock, and I really hope that they're not bringing these characters in as variants of themselves, because why even bother bringing the Netflix shows to Disney Plus in the first place? Because obviously they want us to see those shows so that we learn here's who these characters are when they come back into the MCU. But I would personally like to see, if they do follow up these shows with new seasons and everything else, I would personally like to see what all these characters have been doing in the 10 years or so leading up to the current timeline they're in now, like 2024-ish, which follows Avengers Endgame. I know that's a lot of content to cover, but I wouldn't like to see them, like, skip ahead 10 years or whatever. Like, yeah, okay, here's Matt Murdock. He's just been Daredevil for 10 years. Like, let's just do that. Like, I'd kind of like to see some filling in, like maybe a couple more seasons, especially of Daredevil, like I said. I haven't seen the other shows, so I can't really say whether or not I'd be okay with them making another season of like Jessica Jones and all that stuff. I haven't watched those ones. I just recently finished Daredevil, but I'd like to see them kind of show us what these characters have been up to. That way it still ties into the MCU, and we know these are the same characters from the shows. But then we can also kind of get more of a backstory, like why weren't they helping the Avengers, or what were they up to? And I hope that if they do make new seasons, that they actually feel the same as they did on Netflix. Like, especially a Daredevil show, like, everyone was concerned about it being, because it was rated R on Netflix, I think, so, like, everyone was concerned about Disney sort of dumbing it down to, like, a PG-13 rating, and it wouldn't be as exciting or, like, gruesome as that show was, which made it even better. I'm kind of worried about that as well, but I hope that if they do make new seasons of these shows, or at least of one of them, such as Daredevil, then it'll keep that same kind of structure that it had even on Netflix. Like, obviously, I don't think they'll be able to get the same writers and directors and everything for the show, and it might feel more like their current line of Disney Plus shows where they're kind of these like sort of kid-friendly shows connected to the MCU movies and everything else. I hope they don't do that with these shows, because that might be a problem and might not really make people want to watch them. That's why I'm kind of concerned that they're going to get like lost in the fold, because they have all these other Disney Plus shows coming out that they're creating. These are like original shows. You know, you had WandaVision and Loki and What If and Hawkeye and all those last year, and they have more coming up in the future like Moon Knight and Miss Marvel and all She-Hulk and all of those that tie in directly to the movies. And I'm curious how they would do that with these ones as well, which is why I don't think they will do new seasons, but I think it might benefit if they did at least give a new season. That way, anybody who hasn't seen those shows yet can, like, for example, Daredevil. Anybody who hasn't seen Daredevil can go back and watch the original 3 seasons that it had, and then here's a new season where it's like connected to the MCU now. They could even have characters from the MCU around the time of like 2012 or whenever leading up to Avengers Endgame, like popping up in these shows or whatever, and show like, okay, so Daredevil handled this person or this crime lord or whatever during this time, and that's what happened to that person. It's the same thing as like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, for a while, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was connected to, it wasn't a Marvel Netflix show, I mean, but it was also considered not canon, even though it directly tied into the movies in some cases, but the movies never referenced the events of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So I'd kind of like to maybe see that get renewed as well, and actually tied into the MCU. But especially if all these characters are going to start popping up in the MCU, I'm sure everybody would like to see other characters from these Netflix shows start popping up, so if they're going to do that, then maybe they need more seasons to kind of show, here's what these characters have been up to since the last time you saw them or something. Or at least maybe one more season to kind of tie everything together and finish the series the way they were originally going to be intended to be finished. Like even Daredevil, for example, kind of set up with a cliffhanger ending at the end of season 3. They kind of set up a future season, but never got, it never came to fruition and everything else because the show got canceled. So I think it would at least be a nice way to maybe, even if they wanted to just end these series, at least give them one more season maybe to kind of tie everything together, but also keep them, here's what they're doing in the future, here's how this is tied into the MCU, because we know Matt Murdock is still a lawyer. I don't know, we haven't seen Jessica Jones or anybody popping up yet, but I think a lot of people want them to start showing up in the MCU, so it's like, this would be a good way to kind of show what these characters have been up to in between the events of their show and everything else in the broader MCU overall. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Should these shows be renewed for new seasons now that they're on Disney Plus? Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. We got a lot coming up in the future. We're going to be talking about the Moon Knight series when that comes out on Disney Plus in a few weeks. So if you're a Marvel fan, keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you for watching this video, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.
Subscribe.